Good afternoon. The June 3rd meeting of the Oklahoma City Water Utilities Trust will be in order, and the first item of business is the approval of the minutes for May 20th.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the May 20th meetings. Are there comments or questions? Hearing none, voting please. Next item is the approval of the minutes for the special meeting of May 20th.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes for the special meeting. Are there comments or questions? Hearing none, voting please. Special meeting minutes are approved. Next item is the consent docket.
Move substitute consideration.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent docket.
I have a question.
Well,
Item 4G.
Excuse me, on item 4G, why there's a line there, the line maintenance division performs pre and post CCTV analysis. I guess that's closed circuit TV.
Closed circuit TV.
And do we have enough people and equipment to do it on a regular basis on all our sewer lines, or we just do it when we think we have a problem?
No, we don't have enough people to do it continuously. We have staff who work with the TV and with the root control people to make certain again that it's successful, and then to look for flaws because the sewer is getting clean. We have staff who do our own TV inspection, but they're targeted to problems. So we're doing a broader use of contractors for closed circuit TVing, where we're looking in broad areas, and those also tend to be focused on known problems, places we've identified that they're taking in too much rainwater in heavy storms, for example, is the way that you target. We do some intermittent flow monitoring with the engineering staff to help us guide those studies.
Marcia, don't you really do kind of a risk analysis based upon the age of the line and the type of pipe it is? And in the downtown core, we've replaced almost all the lines, and so that isn't an area we focus on.
Yes.
And the outside area, they're generally new lines based upon the new construction, so that's not where the area is. So you kind of got a ring donut, if you will, that you spend a lot of your time and effort on.
Yes, and trouble calls are one of the ways that we monitor the need for additional analysis. If you've seen root invasion in a neighborhood in multiple places, then you start to look at whether there's something that needs to be done, slip lining, for example, of the pipe. And it's just a continuing day in, day out process. Some communities do a lot more TV inspection than we do. It's a possibility. I think we're doing about the right amount for this time, given the age of our system. You'll see older communities with a substantially older pipe age, maybe 50 or 60 years, doing a lot of TV inspection because a high percentage of their pipe is reaching its life expectancy.
Thank you.
any further questions on the consent docket? Voting please. Consent docket's approved. Next item is the concurrence docket.
Move the concurrence docket subject to individual consideration. Second.
Motion is second to approve the concurrence docket.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick question on 5A. This is a bid on a street improvement project, essentially, and we're relocating a line. And there's a comment in here that a cost cycle analysis, or a life cycle cost analysis, was not required. When are they required? Do we have a rule of thumb that we use, concrete versus asphalt?
Yeah, they do a concrete versus asphalt, absolutely.
But on this one, it says it was not required.
They may not have gotten concrete bids on it. I don't know the background. That's more of a public works question for Eric, but...
Okay, I'll ask Eric. Yeah.
Well, we can get that information back to you.
Any other questions concerning the consent docket? Concurrence docket, excuse me. Voting please. Concurrence docket's approved. Next item is item for individual consideration, executive session concerning the tribal lawsuit. Is there a need for executive session?
No, sir.
Move to strike.
Motion to strike.
Second.
Motion and second to strike. Voting please. Item 6. Next item is item 7, items from trustees. Any comments from trustees?
Just a quick question, Mr. Chairman. We've had some comments about our water supply in the city. It is shrinking. Do we have the opportunity to move water yet from Draper to Hefner?
We cannot bring water to 100% of the service area from Draper to Hafner. We are prosecuting projects that will help us do that. So what we have done, though, is shrink the Hafner service area. We're down to about 25 million gallons a day. This is about the minimum we can pump from Hafner. The new improvements that we've built toward the southwest have helped us push water farther north, generally out of Draper. So we've shifted the service area some to help condense.
Well, the question I had at a function the other night was, if we had no rain whatsoever, no additional water fell, we couldn't get any more out of Canton, and Lake Hefner was a standalone facility, how long could we drink out of it before we run out of water?
About 18 months.
18 months. So it's a pretty good supply then.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Given the rains in the northwest part of the state, has there been any ability to take any water out of the river?
There has been. We've captured about 3,000 acre-feet in Lake Hefner. So it's up from about 54,500 to 57,500. This is the way I remember the numbers today. The lake's been holding its own. There's been a little bit of flow still coming down the river over the last few days. It's spring. We're always optimistic, but we are watching all the possible options, of course. We do have the Overholser plant up and running because this is a critical time for loss of services and damages in spring storms. So the Overholser's up to keep us in backup over the next month.
Further comments from trustees? Next item is General Manager's report. There's a presentation by Red Oak on the cost of service study results.
Mr. Chairman and trustees, Jennifer Ivey with Red Oak Consulting is with us this afternoon to summarize the work that's been done and wrap up the consultant part of the cost of service study. We're happy to answer questions. Staff and Jennifer will be happy to answer questions. Okay.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today to present to you the study findings and our recommendations. As you know, the study came about to help to fund the significant capital improvements plan that you have for the next 10 years, a large portion of that being the second Atoka pipeline. Today, we're going to go through the study process and the objectives. We're going to look in a little more detail at that CIP. We're going to look at the financial plan, 3 different options that we considered, and the findings of each of those. And then we'll look at the rate designs themselves and talk about how those rate designs would impact your customers. And then finally, we'll also talk about the system development charges and our recommendations there. So the decision points that we considered when we looked at the different options, we were looking at the system development charges, or SDCs, and to what degree we would implement those. Would we go to a full cost SDC right away? Would we look at transition plans? Would we do something less than full cost? We also looked at the rate structure. We understand that you want to look at a conservation-oriented structure, so we looked at that and talked about phasing in that as well. And then finally, we looked at the wholesale rates, the different structures that you currently have, and what we felt like would make sense going forward. The objectives of this study itself that you had printed in your request for proposal are listed here. As I said, one of the key drivers is this second Atoka pipeline. So we wanted to be sure that you can fund that pipeline and that you can still meet your other financial objectives. We understand that your bond rating is very important here, and so we were looking for a plan that would help you to maintain that rating and continue to be a very sustainable utility in the future. This chart shows the steps of the study itself. We started there at the first step looking at the revenue requirements, so focusing more on just the financial plan. And then we went into the cost of service allocations, looking at how do we break down these costs and assign them to the different types of customers. And then finally, we came up with the rate designs that would recover revenue sufficient to pay for those costs. So I mentioned the 10-year capital improvement program being a major driver here. And these two pie charts show a breakdown of that. The one on the left shows the breakdown for raw water and then all of your other water, CIP, and your wastewater. So you can see there in green that a significant portion of this CIP is raw water and is mostly related to that Atoka pipeline. On the right, we looked at it as more of growth versus non-growth. So the Atoka pipeline, again, being mostly a growth project. So as you can see, it looks like more than 50% of your capital improvement program is related to growth. The three different options that we looked at for the financial plan are listed here. The first option was our baseline option, and that option was looking at what do we need to do to the rates if we don't make any changes to the SDCs. So the options that we are presenting all assume that you would be using state revolving fund loans for financing your capital improvement program. We're also focused on meeting your debt service coverage requirement of 2.0, or 2 times your debt service payments, and that's as a combined utility. For option 2, we looked at increasing the water system development charge from the current fee of $100 to $1,000 beginning immediately in 2015. And then we would not make any changes to the sewer SDC. For option 3, we looked at a 3-year transition from the $100 water SDC to $1,000 in 2017. So those are really the differences between options 2 and 3. This table shows the results of these 3 alternatives. So in option 1, we would look at an increase to the water revenue of 5.25%, and that's in addition to adding 75 cents per year to the monthly base charge. And then on the sewer side, we would have an increase in the revenue of 4%. For options 2 and 3, the water increase would only need to be 5%, and again, that's in addition to the 75 cent increase to the base charge. You can see that these 3 options don't vary a lot, but the nuances there that I'll point out are in your debt service coverage. Options 2 and 3, where you have the higher SDC, really allows you to fund more of your CIP with cash, which you can see in the PAYGO and debt financing columns. And that really increases your debt service coverage. So it allows you to maintain a higher debt service coverage. When we looked at the rates, as I mentioned, we wanted to look at a conservation-oriented rate structure. So for residential, we are recommending that you move in 2 phases. The first phase would move you from your current rate structure, which is a uniform rate structure, and it would move you to a 2-block rate structure. And we would recommend that that first block be the first 10,000 gallons that a customer uses, and then if they use more than 10,000 gallons in 1 month, they would pay a higher rate for that usage. Phase 2 would begin in year 6, and we would recommend that you then add a 3rd block to the structure. We don't have the block thresholds in there on this slide because we recommend that you look at that again in a few years. At that point, if your conservation-oriented rate structure is in fact encouraging conservation, 10,000 may be too large a block for that first block, and you may want to change that to something less than that. The addition of the 2nd and 3rd blocks would really help you to, as I said, encourage conservation, which is important while you're building the 2nd Atoka pipeline. And we also are setting these blocks and the rates themselves so that you would recover enough revenue from your base charge and from the first block to cover your fixed cost and your debt. And then, as I mentioned, we would look at adjusting both the base charges and the block intervals as needed. For non-residential, which includes these customer types listed, we recommend a similar block structure. The difference here is that your non-residential customers are so varied. You may have a very small retail shop that only uses 2,000 or 3,000 gallons a month, or you could have a very large industrial facility that uses hundreds of thousands of gallons a month. And because of the variance that you have in the different types of customers, we don't typically recommend a block structure that has a set threshold like we are on residential. So one of the ways that you can still have a block structure for non-residential is to use what we're calling AWC, which stands for average winter consumption. So in this case, each individual customer would have their own usage amount in each block, and it would be set on the average amount of water that they're using during the winter months. And again, we would recommend going to a 2-block structure for the first 5 years and then moving to a 3-block structure in years 6 through 10. One of the things that we did consider is that as you increase the rates and therefore the bills that your customers are paying, they're going to get the price signal and they're going to cut back on the water that they use. If we don't consider this as part of our study, then what will happen is you'll have a revenue shortfall because they won't be using as much water and therefore they won't be paying as much. So we did factor this into the study. There was a recent study from Ohio State University, or not, sorry, not Ohio, Oklahoma State University that looked at the price elasticity factors in the area, and those are listed in the top row here. And so we factored that in, and you can see in this example, we're using the 5% annual increase. And the result of that is that in the first year, the assumed reduction in usage would be 1%. And then in future years, it would continue, we would continue to reduce that amount. So you can see that by year 5, we're actually assuming a 4.3 reduction in the usage per bill. And so that gets factored into the study so that we can be sure that the rates are sufficient or high enough so that when customers conserve, you're still recovering enough revenue. When we looked at the rate design, we also considered many other factors that are listed here. The key thing here to note is that your residential customers are 90% of your bills. So that's where, you know, we wanted to pay a lot of attention to the impacts on these customers because that's where the bulk of your customers are. But they're using just under 50% of the water that you're selling. So that's something that we considered in the study. So these are the 3 options that we looked at in the rate designs. As I mentioned before, there's not a lot of difference in these rate designs. For option 1, where we don't have any increase to the SDCs, we would see a higher base charge of $12.06 for your 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter. And then the volume charge would go to $2.74 for the first 10,000 gallons from $2.65. And then any usage over 10,000 would go to $2.88. For the wastewater, the base charge would be $3.72, and then all usage would be at $3.93 per 1,000 gallons. For options 2 and 3, as I said, the water is slightly less, and that's because you're getting more revenue from your STCs. Wastewater, there's no difference between the 3 alternatives. For non-residential, we looked at we've got the options up here. We've got for multifamily and commercial, industrial, they're the same. They would be paying the same rates. And they would be $271 for the first block and then $285 beyond that. Option 2, the second block would be slightly lower. Again, that's just because you're getting more revenue from SDCs. But for option 3, at the last meeting, we heard from you that you wanted to see a little bit more significant difference in the 2 blocks. And so we have gone with a higher block 2 rate here of $3.12. For residential, there's really no difference, again, in the three options, and they would just be paying a uniform rate. So this shows the impact of these different rates on a single-family residential customer. We're assuming that this customer uses, has a 5/8-inch meter, uses 7,000 gallons of water in 1 month, and has 5,000 gallons of sewer in the month. So under option 1, their bill would go from $51.60 to $54.61, and that would be a $3.01 increase. Under options 2 and 3, they would see a $2.88 increase to $54.48. Now, I will point out that options 2 and 3 are the same here because this average customer is only using 7,000 gallons. For the customers that use more than 10,000 gallons, you would see a difference between 2 and 3. And option 3, obviously, they would be a larger increase in their bill. And that assumes, of course, that they're not changing their usage pattern. This chart shows you the breakdown of customers and how much they use. The 10,000 mark, the line there, shows you where the blocks would break. So you would have 80% of your bills would not really go into block 2, and that's 70% of the usage. So block 2 doesn't impact that many of your residential customers. And the typical customer or the average customer that we just looked at the 7,000 gallon mark, you have 70% of your customers that use 7,000 gallons or less, and that represents 60% of the usage. This graph shows the impact, and what this is telling us is that under option 1, you would have about 65% of your customers would see an increase of around 8-9%. And then under options 2 and 3, most of your customers would see an increase in the range of 5% to about 8 or 9%. Another telling thing here is that under option 3, you can see at the tail end of this chart that you have more customers that are seeing these double-digit percentage increases, and those are your customers that are using more than 10,000 gallons. So that's where you see that shift, the lower bar coming down in the middle there, but then there you've got more customers that are seeing the significant increase because they're using more water. We looked at a couple of your non-residential customers. We looked at one of your local hospitals and a hotel, and this just shows their typical bill and how these rates would impact them. One thing to note on this table is the hospital. You can see that their water usage is 50,000 gallons, but their average winter consumption is 29,000. So there is a big chunk of their usage that would go into that higher block, which is why you see such a significant increase between options 2 and 3. Whereas the hotel has a smaller amount that would be in that block 2, so they don't see as significant an increase there. For wholesale rates, the block on the left shows you what you currently have as options for a wholesale customer. They have 3 different options, and we're proposing that you keep the service availability option, but that you phase out take or pay and on demand and move those customers over to what we're calling time of day. And the time of day structure would be based on each individual customer's average day usage, peak day usage, and peak hour usage. The objectives of our recommendations for wholesale, we wanted the rates to be based on the cost to serve those wholesale customers. We wanted them to be equitable, so we don't want any one wholesale customer to be paying more than their fair share because of the type of, or the way that another customer is using their water. And we want them to pay their share of the water supply costs. The challenges in coming up with a rate are that they do vary differently in the way that they use your water. Some are using it consistently, that's their main source of water. Others are using it to peak when they need to during the summer months. And so we wanted to come up with rate structures that would reflect this. And then, as I said, our recommendation is to go to having those two types of rates. We recommend that you phase this in, so we'd like to offer the time of day rate right away, but not force anybody to switch to that. We would convert the demand rate first, so any customers that were still on demand rate in 2017 would then be switched over to the time of day rate, and then take or pay customers would be switched over in 2019.
So that means there's no users of time of day rates in 16, 15 and 16? Or who would use it
There would be.
in 16?
Right. In 15 and 16, it would be offered
Right.
if they wanted to change
So it's their
sooner.
choice,
Right.
but they would be moved over affirmatively off
Right.
of the
At 17
demand rate in 17?
Yes.
Okay.
By 2017, the demand rate would no longer be
Right,
offered.
okay,
So,
thank you.
and this shows you the rates for the different types of structures. So there's really not much of a difference in the three different options here because most of the differences in the options went towards the retail customers. But there is a small difference in time of day between option 1 and then options 2 and 3. Okay, for the system development charges, as I mentioned, we looked at option 1, there would be no change. So the combined SDC for a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter would be $350. For option 2, we would increase the water SDC to $1,000. So in 2015, the combined SDC would go up to $1,250. And then for option 3, we would phase it in over 3 years. So the combined SDC would be $650. We looked at several utilities that were a good comparison to Oklahoma City and what they're charging for SDCs or impact fees, as some call them. And so you can see here the cities that we surveyed. Oklahoma City's current water SDC is there on the far left at $100, and the sample average was $1,162. For wastewater, Oklahoma City is at $250 for a typical single-family SDC, and the sample average is $1,251. So when you look at them combined here, you can see Oklahoma City at $350, and the sample average is $2,413. So that concludes the presentation. The next steps, we'd like to prepare a rate ordinance and bring that back to you, and then hopefully we can get a recommendation from you to take that to City Council for approval. We also plan to meet with the wholesale customers to be sure that they understand the different options that we would be offering them and answer any questions that they have, and then ultimately we'd look for adoption of the proposed rates.
We also, staff prepared 2 handouts that are at your place, one for water and wastewater rates in the metro area exclusively, and one for system development charges, again, called impact fees, also in the metro area exclusively.
Martha, are you talking about a one-year rate increase at this time, or are you talking about a multi-year rate increase?
No, sir, we focused on the
1 year.
1 year to identify the differences
Right.
year to year, but the proposal would likely be a 3-year
Yeah, okay.
proposal with, again, system development charge options include a phase-in over 3 years that would add $900 to the water system development charge, and importantly, a 75 cents per month add-on to the base for water to help fund, to help manage our times. I should let Brett say the term. appropriate, but to help meet the needs of the increasing debt service coverage.
But, so, I think we kind of got into the workshops. We all agreed that we needed some type of rate increase for the system development charges or the impact fees. And I clearly heard Mr. White say that he wants to get them up there in his experiences from 26, 7 years ago. But, Mr. White, if we threw out an option where it was in place and there was a phase-in, but they were firmly set over a 3-year period, is that as problematic for you as long as they're...
No, that doesn't bother me. I just think it needs to be out there.
Yeah.
People need to know rates are X and they're going to be X plus whatever a year from now or 2 years from now or whenever we don't, the only thing that we revisit is whether or not to do what we said we were going to do, which we can always do that. But it's all...
We've never gone back on a rate increase once we've implemented.
Exactly.
When we've
Exactly.
implemented. Yeah.
But our intent would be to phase in this entire amount over 3 years, and that would be in the rate, or it would be in some kind of communication to the developers.
Right.
Now, is that money restricted to use in the water and sewer waste?
Yes. And so I think there's a parallel discussion going on right now. Planning is working with the Public Works Department right now and the finance people, and to come back with establish an impact fee for roadway improvements, which should probably parallel this. It'd probably be about $1,000, so it ended up being like $2,000, a little over $2,000 impact fee all in with roads, water, and wastewater. But again, if that was done over a 3-year period, I think would be a better way to do that, as long as it's adopted at this time to make sure that
No, I agree.
to accommodate Mr. White's concerns. So that being said, because I think we had a lot of discussion in the workshops, and we all agreed that we needed to increase the impact fees to the amount that was recommended. So that kind of throws option 1 out the window. Puts that aside and looks at 2 and 3. And if we go with the phase-in, that's option 3 as we go forward. And and then we had Mr. Gray's discussion about the third block and how quickly that goes in, and should we have a more steep second block. And that was certainly your concerns from a week or 2 ago. Are you?
Sure. No, as long as we're making progress towards orienting our rates with this focus on conservation and making people aware of the cost of what they're consuming, then I'm okay. Sooner rather than later for me, but as long as we're making progress down that road, whatever works best for everyone, certainly fine.
So are we looking for a motion to give them direction, or is it just a consensus that we go forward, or what?
I actually did not ask for a motion today, but I would like to bring back recommendations for an action item.
Okay, well, I'm sensing consensus around the group.
I would be thrilled to take it and run.
The group here of option 3. You're seeing nodding with heads, although not, we'll vote on it at a future meeting. I didn't violate anything there, did I?
I see a difference between what we're doing here and the fee that Public Works is working on with regard to roads and so forth. I think the last time we let ourselves get trapped into this conversation and we ended up with a situation where we had to spend the money in a certain place. If 1% was for parks, then 1% of it had to be allocated to a park within 50 feet of the plug or whatever, and that's never going to work. For us, that's not going to work. I think my view is that we separate this and we go forward with this and let the other, while I'm not opposed to the other, I think it's a mixed message to get them together again.
I totally agree they should be separate, but I think it'd be disingenuous to the development community to not to lay out our expectations.
Tell them it's fine. That's fine. Tell them, but I think they ought to be totally separate.
Would the development fee be allocated to a specific area, or would it be available, not the water one, but the general,
That's yet to be worked out. The municipal counselor's office has a strong desire, I'm speaking for Mr. Keith here, has a strong desire to try to tie the source of the revenue to the area which it's collected. And there's different options to get us to that realm, and I even believe there's probably some new legislation that helps us get to where we need to be. So I don't think we're prepared to answer that today, but we're having some discussions.
but I think it's important that we focus on that because it's going to be
It was so convoluted last time.
Last time we got involved with a number of trips back and forth, and we had 7-Elevens paying $2 million in impact fee, and they just didn't like that at all.
Since we had the discussion previously, there has been new state legislation passed, which provides us better guidelines and a little more flexibility and direction for doing that. So I think it gives us more opportunities to look at those issues.
See, Mr. White, that's something the positive that came out of the legislature. That wasn't this year, but it was.
A blind hog finds an acorn on occasion, I think. Anyway, I think that's it. We're adjourned.